Arthur is a tyrannical king who rules over the world with an iron fist. During his ascent to the throne, Arthur slaughtered his enemies, nuked cities, and committed countless atrocities, all in the name of power. But one day he reflects on all the things he has done. He's overcome with a sense of guilt, and in the next moment he dies of a heart attack. As he is slowly descending into the abyss, a voice calls out to him and says it will give him a second chance at life, so he had better not mess it up this time. A few moments later, Arthur opens his eyes and finds two people looking down at him. The man says his name is Reynold and he is Arthur's father, while Alice over here is his mother. They don't really expect their newborn baby to understand what they are saying, but they are so excited to have him. Arthur slowly comes to the realization that these people really are his parents and he was just born a minute ago. He's still finding it hard to believe that he's a baby again, but he can't deny that his parents are really good at taking care of him. Overall, he is pretty happy, but he still doesn't like the fact that he is stuck in a baby body. He's got an oversized head, he can't speak, and every couple of hours he shits his diaper involuntarily, so he has lost all control. But then he notices something that's even stranger than his current circumstance. He watches as Reynold channels energy into his fists and proceeds to smash a boulder to pieces. Arthur is amazed because this is a power that he knows nothing about, despite all his years as the ruler of the world. This feat is apparently quite an impressive one, so Reynold is proud of himself and turns to his family, so they can praise him, but he fails to pay attention to his surroundings, so a rock falls straight into his head. Alice was worried something like this might happen, so she then goes over to him and starts using magic to heal Reynold's injury, but she warns him to be more careful next time he wants to show off. Reynold may have just been trying to show off, but when he gets serious, those fists are no joke because he can easily one-shot a wild boar when he goes out hunting, and having him around makes things a lot easier for his party members. By the time the hunting trip is over, Reynold returns to his family and is ready for a welcome back hug, but then he remembers that he is still covered in boar blood, so he's going to have to get cleaned up first. Arthur has learned two things from seeing this. 1. This world is so dangerous that it is common for people to own weapons for their protection. And 2. He's going to have to learn how to fight if he wants to live freely in this world. Now that Reynold is back, Alice says it's time to put Arthur down for a nap, and normally he'd be upset about being treated like a baby, but this is one part he actually enjoys. Back in his previous life, he rarely ever got the chance to sleep peacefully because people would always try to assassinate him when he least expected it. Of course, he could easily defeat any attackers that came after him, but it was incredibly stressful. Months pass and Arthur's baby limbs are finally strong enough to allow him to move around on his own now. The first thing he does with his new mobility is go over to a mirror so he can take a long hard look at himself. His parents think it's cute that Arthur is so mesmerized by his reflection, but he is just coming to terms with the fact that he really is a baby. Anyway, since Arthur can move on his own now, when Alice puts him down for a nap later that day, he sets his plan into motion. As soon as she leaves the room, he opens his eyes and throws his blanket out of the crib so he can climb down and escape his crib. He then proceeds to crawl across the floor while Alice is busy doing the dishes, and she must be really focused on those dishes, because Arthur makes it all the way to the other side of the room without her noticing. Once he gets there, he opens the door to the house's library and pulls out a book because he needs to learn more about this world. After reading one of the books, he learns that this continent is called Dicathen, and it is divided into 3 kingdoms. The Dwarf Kingdom, a nation of dwarves that live in vast cave cities. The Elenoir Kingdom, a nation of elves who live deep within the forest. And the Sapien Kingdom, a kingdom of humans ruled by a king, although here no one ever nuked the cities to take over. Arthur still wants to learn more, so he pulls out another book and it gives him some much-needed answers. Arthur had noticed that the level of technology in this world is lacking, and the reason for that is the presence of magic. People are able to use magic by manipulating the mana within their bodies, and while it's not exactly common, magic is a huge part of life in this world. People can use magic in 2 ways, namely augmentation and conjuring. Augmentation involves circulating mana within your body, granting the user incredible strength, defense, and agility, while conjurers can project their mana outwards and use it to control any phenomenon they desire. That pretty much sums up the info about this world's magic system, but Arthur doesn't find anything about the healing magic Alice used earlier, so he assumes she must be an exception of some sort. From what Arthur can tell, most people manifest their mana when they hit puberty, and by channeling that mana through something called a mana core, one can learn to control it and become a mage. This is easy for Arthur to understand, because in his previous life he rose to power thanks to the innate power of ki within him. It functioned the exact same way as mana, so he tries focusing all his energy to see if he can generate a reaction, and sure enough his mana core begins to develop. This is a huge step forward in Arthur's development. Before he can do any more training, Alice finally finds him. She's been worried sick ever since she found out he wasn't in his crib, so she's glad he wasn't hurt. But while she's holding him up, she notices that something is different about him. Arthur is worried she might have sensed the mama within him, but she actually just noticed that Arthur pooped himself again. 2 years go by and Alice is writing in her journal one day. She's so grateful that Arthur is growing up strong and healthy, but she's starting to grow a little concerned because she hasn't seen Arthur smile even once since he was born. Just then, she notices Reynold and Arthur outside, and it looks like Reynold is giving Arthur some sword lessons. Arthur seems pretty interested, but Alice is furious that Reynold would let a 2-year-old swing a dangerous stick around. By now, Arthur has realized that Alice isn't someone you want to get angry, so he's going to have to be careful not to make her mad. To avoid any other dangerous activities, Alice decides to take Arthur out for the day to show him around the town, and Arthur is particularly excited about this because it will give him a chance to gather valuable first-hand information about this world. He can discern the level of this nation's technology by looking at the weapons that are sold to the general public, and he also gets to see various substances that he has never encountered before. Best of all, he got to witness a mage casting fire magic up close. So overall, today's trip proved to be incredibly valuable for him. By the end of the day, Arthur's baby body is exhausted from all the activity, so he is struggling to stay awake and Alice wants to put him down for a nap as soon as they get home. As limiting as this new life has been, Arthur has come to enjoy life with loving parents. In his past life, Arthur got dropped off at spawn with no starter kit, so he was forced to live his entire childhood in an orphanage and never got to experience parental love, so this is a nice change of pace for him. Arthur soon falls asleep on Alice's shoulder, so she starts carrying him to his crib, and along the way she tells him how proud she is of him for learning so much. She has noticed all the times he sneaks out of his bed to read books, and she saw how excited he was to see the outside world, so she is sure he has an adventurous spirit. She assumes he must have gotten that from Reynold, and sooner or later, Arthur is bound to want to leave home to see the world on his own. Personally, she would prefer it if Arthur lived a peaceful life here, but as long as he is happy, she will support him no matter what. The next day, Arthur is standing by the window and watches as Reynold begins practicing in the front yard. He is interested in seeing the applications of magic up close and personal again, so he eagerly watches as Reynold begins circulating mana within his body. Eventually, rocks begin to fly up from the ground, and Reynold makes it seem like it's the greatest thing in the world. But in reality, it is pretty pitiful. This is the limit of Reynold's skill when it comes to conjuring, but that's because Reynold's specialty is augmentation, so his magic is much more efficient when he sticks to using it within his body. Seeing his father's power motivates Arthur to go do some training, but just when he's about to climb down from the table, Alice tells him it's time for his nap. Arthur still can't speak yet, so he starts whining as they pass the bookshelf, but Alice tells him he needs to take a nap, so there's no time for books right now. Normally there would be nothing Arthur could do about this, but he recently learned a legendary technique, pouting. Arthur has mastered the art of weaponizing his cuteness as a baby, so even though Alice still wants to put him down for a nap, she eventually relents and just lets him read his book. Once Arthur is alone, he begins practicing with his mana core, and over the past 2 years he has managed to get pretty good at it. By gathering various fragments of mana within his body, he was able to generate a mana core within himself, and although it was incredibly strenuous, it was well worth it. Now, with just a little more effort, he should be able to cast his first spell, but Arthur drastically underestimates the strength of his mana and accidentally blows up the house. Alice and Reynold were outside when the explosion happened, and it was so huge that Reynolds' back gets burned up really bad, but he and Alice are otherwise alright. However, they soon realize that Arthur was still in the house when it blew up, so they rush inside to check if he's still alive. There's no way a baby could have survived an explosion of that magnitude, but when Reynold reaches the library, he is shocked to find that not only is Arthur completely unharmed, he was also the source of the explosion. He's barely 3 years old, so it shouldn't have been possible for him to use magic until he was at least 12. Yet Arthur is already practically a master of mana. He stands proudly and looks at his parents, but he forgets that the house is falling apart. So when 2 roof beams fall straight towards him, he is completely caught off guard. He tries running away, but his stubby baby legs fail him, so it looks like he's done for. Fortunately, both Alice and Reynold rush in to save him, and while Alice shields him with her body, Reynold uses his magic to block all the debris and save them both. Arthur is a bit shocked since this is the first time anyone has ever risked their life to save him, but Alice is so relieved that he is alright that she starts crying. Arthur still isn't used to having people care about him like this, so seeing her cry makes him cry as well. Things continue. Arthur never could have done something like this in his old life because he was expected to be a ruthless king. At one point, a man tried to assassinate Arthur, so after he was caught, the entire council assembled and prepared to sentence him for his crimes. And on top of that, they plan to ship the man's wife and son off to a camp that has never heard of the Geneva Convention, so they are doomed to be tortured and experimented on. Because why not? The man begins to beg Arthur to spare his family because they don't deserve to suffer for what he did. And as an act of mercy, Arthur decided to kill him on the spot. That was basically an average Monday for him back then, but now he spends his Mondays training with his father. Reynold wants Arthur to try practicing with gauntlets, but Arthur already has a lifetime of sword experience, so he's not switching his main weapon. Since Arthur is so insistent on using his sword, Reynold decides to use one as well, and to make things a little more interesting, he's going to reinforce his sword with mana. However, to his utter shock, Arthur does the exact same thing and cuts through Reynold's sword with ease. After seeing this, Reynold realized that Arthur is way too talented for him to train, so he is thinking of getting a professional teacher for him and goes inside to talk to Alice about it. Alice flat out says no to the idea because she can't stand the thought of sending Arthur to some random town just so he can learn. They had already talked about this, and Reynold was supposed to teach Arthur to fight while she would teach him about magic. But Reynold points out that Arthur managed to cut right through his sword during practice, even though it was infused with mana and the kid is still a toddler for God's sake. If he's doing stuff like this at such a young age, then who knows what he could be capable of in the future, so Reynold thinks it's important for him to have a proper teacher. Alice can't deny that Arthur is unnaturally talented, but she still hates the idea of leaving him alone at a school in the city. So she and Reynold start arguing over it for a few minutes because they can't come to an agreement. Arthur is getting sick of all the arguing, so he points out that they can just come with him to the city. That way he can still get a teacher, and his parents won't have to leave him alone. The two of them hadn't realized that was an option, but it solves all their problems, so they think it's a great idea. So they immediately start making preparations for the journey, and the next day a carriage arrives to take them to the city. They will be traveling with some of their old friends, and Arthur recognizes them because they are the ones who helped Alice and Reynold rebuild the house after he blew it up. They are all in a party called Twin Horns, and the leader, Adam, introduces himself to Arthur. Angela introduces herself as well, while simultaneously introducing Arthur to her chest and nearly choking him out, and Alice is happily watching it happen. Luckily, before Arthur passes out, Durden gets him away from Angela and introduces himself as well, but he is a bit more gentle and just gives Arthur a high five. Arthur then notices a girl standing on top of the carriage, and you know she's trying to her farm because there's no reason to be standing on the carriage right now. She doesn't say anything, so the others tell Arthur that her name is Jasmine and the final member of the team is Helen, the archer. Since the introductions are finally done, the group needs to get moving, so they all climb into the carts and head out. Along the way, Alice asks Arthur if he is excited about his first big trip, and Arthur says yes, but internally he is thinking about how primitive this world is. They still use horse-drawn carriages to travel here, while in Arthur's old world he had an entire fleet of flying cars he could use at any time. After traveling for most of the day, the group decides to take a break for lunch, so they set up camp, but as soon as they stop, they are attacked by wolves. Although these wolves are pretty dumb because they didn't even try to surround the group, they just charged straight in and got bodies by the team of adventurers in an instant. Arthur finds the whole display interesting since this is the first time he has seen real combat in this world, and he intends to become strong enough to handle threats like that on his own soon. Since they got a lot of dead wolf meat now, the group decides to cook it for dinner tonight, but they got no spices, so it's just gonna be plain grilled meat. Just then, Alice notices that Reynold's arm is slightly injured, so she offers to heal it for him. But before she does, Jasmine tells her to wait a moment. All the others gather around Alice to keep a lookout because healers like her are incredibly rare in this world. So if someone were to see her using healing magic, then she could end up being targeted for it. Once Alice is done healing Reynold, everyone goes back to what they were doing before, but Adam decides he wants to get a little exercise before he goes to bed. And there's no better way to do that than by fighting a 4-year-old. Seems like a jerk move, but Adam has heard about how strong Arthur is and he just wants to see for himself, so this is just a practice match. Adam tells Arthur to get ready and he has already imbued his spear with mana, so Arthur does the same. As the match begins, Arthur channels some magic into his feet, so just as he is about to clash with Adam, he vanishes and reappears behind him. This would have been the perfect chance for Arthur to strike, but his stubby toddler feet slip on the ground, so he loses his footing and Adam gets a chance to recover. Arthur and Adam then begin clashing, but I'm pretty sure the animation budget must have had negative values. Anyway, Arthur gets knocked back since his toddler body is too light to keep up with the seasoned adventurer, so he gets knocked into the air. Luckily, the others save him before he hits the ground, and they all start yelling at Adam for nearly hurting Arthur, but Adam says he couldn't help it because Arthur was too strong for him to hold back. There's no way a toddler should be capable of such strength, so he thinks Randall must have been giving him some kind of super soldier training. But in reality, he never actually taught Arthur to do any of this stuff, he just learned it on his own. Just then, Jasmine walks up to Arthur and startles him by accident. She was really impressed by Arthur's fight, so she asks him to teach her how to do that thing with the magic in his feet. Arthur was hoping to keep his technique secret since it is something he mastered in his past life. But she's not taking no for an answer, and from the look in her eyes, she's going to pester him relentlessly until he caves, so he may have to teach her eventually. The next morning, the journey continues as planned, and along the way they take a few breaks to relax. During these breaks, Adam gives Arthur a few basic spearman lessons, and Helen teaches him how to use a bow a few minutes after that. And with a few basic lessons, he is able to figure it out pretty quickly. The only weapon knowledge Arthur has from his past life is with a sword, so these lessons are really valuable to him. And since he is learning so much from them, he decides to teach Jasmine his technique after all. By channeling magic into your feet and using wind magic at the same time, you are able to boost your speed tremendously. And after demonstrating it once, Jasmine is able to replicate it perfectly. Later on, Arthur is reading a magic book in the carriage, but for some reason, Jasmine is sitting there too and just staring at him. And it's not a coincidence either because she keeps taking every chance she can get to get close to Arthur. The next morning, Jasmine gives Arthur a knife as thanks for teaching her that technique, and it's clear that she really likes Arthur since she usually doesn't interact with people intentionally. A few minutes later, everyone gets back into the carriages and they continue through the journey. But as Arthur is reading his book, the carriage is suddenly attacked by bandits. They are being attacked by bandits, and the carriage is completely surrounded, so there's nowhere for them to go. The bandit leader orders his men to capture the women and children so they can be sold as slaves. So all the bandits rush in and the adventurers do their best to hold them off. In terms of raw power, the Twin Horns and Reynold are much stronger than the individual bandits, but there are way too many for them to defeat on their own, so sooner or later they're going to get overwhelmed. At one point, Reynold gets launched into the carriage by the bandit leader and he is badly hurt, so Alice wants to come to heal him. However, Reynold tells her to stay away because the bandits find out about her power and they'll start targeting her. So instead, he asks Arthur to take Alice and run as far away as he can. Arthur doesn't want to leave Reynold behind, but Reynold tells him that Alice is pregnant with another child, so protecting her should be a top priority. Arthur understands when Reynold gives the signal, he prepares his magic to flee with Alice, and in the meantime, Reynold says he will hold the bandits off. The bandit leader orders his men to go after Arthur and Alice, but Reynold refuses to let that happen, so he charges in and clashes with him. The bandit leader managed to knock Reynold down before, but this time Reynold's family is on the line, so he's not going down easily. While Reynold is keeping the bandit leader busy, a few of the more insignificant bandits try to go after Arthur and Alice instead, but Adam and Jasmine throw some daggers at them and take them out to clear a path for Arthur to escape with Alice. They're all doing their best to keep the bandits away from Arthur, and he is doing his best to get Alice to safety. It's honestly ironic how he spent his previous life taking things with no regard for others, and now he is forced to run away in order to avoid losing someone precious to him. After running away for several minutes, Arthur thinks they should be far enough from the bandits to be safe now, but he was wrong. One bandit is watching them from atop a cliff, and this one is capable of using magic, so he attacks Arthur and Alice with a wind spell. Arthur doesn't notice him at first, and by the time he does, the spell has already been cast, so the only thing Arthur can do is push Alice out of the way and take the hit alone. The wind blast knocks Arthur back, so he's going to fall off the cliff, and with his toddler body, that's basically a death sentence. However, if he's going to die, he's not going out alone, so as he's falling off the cliff, he takes the knife he got from Jasmine and throws it at the magic bandit. The knife hits the bandit and the string wraps around his ankle, so Arthur is able to use it to pull the guy down with him. The adventurers try to use their magic to save Arthur, but he has already fallen too far for them to reach him, so Arthur is doomed. As he falls to his inevitable death, Arthur looks back on his life, and even though he is going to die, he is filled with a strange sense of peace because he knows he managed to protect his precious family. He finally understands why that man in his past life was so desperate to protect his family. Arthur didn't even think twice about sacrificing himself to save Alice. And while he doesn't regret his actions at all, he still wishes he could have survived to live with them a little longer. The story continues. We see after that deadly fall, Arthur somehow manages to get out of the river and make his way into a cave. However, he comes face to face with a terrifying monster, and he's starting to regret coming here for shelter. He tries to sneak attack the monster to increase his chances of survival, but the monster simply smacks him out of the air and tells him to calm down. It tells Arthur that it isn't evil and just wants to be friends, but the last time a stranger said that to me, I ended up in the back of a van, so I'm not sure Arthur should trust it. In any case, he is still badly wounded and his injuries aren't going to recover unless he eats something. So the monster starts picking fruits off the cave wall. It tells Arthur to eat the fruits, but he doesn't trust the random wall fruits, so he's about to get up to talk his way out of this. But just then, his injuries finally catch up to him, so as he tries to get up, he hears something snap and starts crying his eyes out. The monster tells him to stop crying because it's a miracle that he survived that fall in the first place. Arthur has a lot of things he wants to ask, but the monster tells him that it won't answer his questions unless he eats the fruits. He was hesitant at first, but after biting into the first berry, Arthur realizes that they actually taste pretty good. Once he is done stuffing his face, Arthur turns to the monster and asks it if it knows anything about his parents' current condition. The monster explains that it isn't able to leave this cave, so it can't check up on Arthur's family for him. But it does have an ability that allows it to see over a great distance, so it generates a screen and shows Arthur that his parents successfully defeated the rest of the bandits. That means they are still alive and well, and Arthur couldn't be happier to hear such good news. He thanks the monster for letting him know that his parents are still alright, and since Arthur is going to be stuck here for a while, he decides to be friendly with it. The monster's name is Sylvia, and she turns out to be a really nice person. Over the next few days, Arthur stayed here, ate, and rested so his injuries could heal, and all the while, Sylvia kept watch over him. Once his body had recovered, Arthur wanted to return home as soon as possible. But according to Sylvia, Arthur would never survive the journey home by himself. His cave is currently on the outskirts of the Elven Forest, and this part of the forest is filled with all sorts of magical beasts and immoral bandits, and Arthur simply can't handle all that. But that doesn't mean he's going to be stuck here forever. Sylvia has the ability to open a dimensional rift so she can send Arthur back home, or at least to a safer location than this forest. But it's going to take a long time for her to create the rift, so Arthur is going to have to wait until then. Since he has nothing better to do, Arthur picks up a stick and starts swinging it around to practice his swordsmanship skills. Several more days go by, and while Arthur has grown to enjoy Sylvia's company, he hasn't managed to learn anything about her. All he knows is she looks like a terrifying monster. She's apparently hiding from something, and she's a very kind person. After Arthur is done with his sword training for the day, he heads over to a rock and sits down so he can start training his mana. Sylvia is impressed that a child as young as Arthur already has a mana core, but she's sure that he never learned how to do this. She stretches out her hand and a large quantity of mana begins pooling in her hand. Arthur is amazed because Sylvia is basically accumulating mana while she's casting her spell, and if Arthur were able to learn such a thing then he would undoubtedly become incredibly strong. With that said, before Sylvia even offers to teach it to him, she asks Arthur what he plans to do with the power he will gain from learning this technique. Arthur had never really considered it before, but now that he thinks about it, he recalls how his family and friends were all nearly wiped out because of some bandits. So he tells Sylvia that he will use his power to destroy anyone who dares to hurt his family. However, Sylvia doesn't like that answer, so she flicks Arthur on the forehead and knocks him back. She says she would never teach her technique to someone who thinks like that, but Arthur doesn't understand why she is so upset since it is perfectly natural to want to kill your enemies. Sylvia wants to prove a point, so she raises her finger to Arthur's head, and tells him that she could easily split his skull open with it, or she could touch him gently. She asks Arthur which one he would prefer, and Arthur obviously doesn't want to die, so he says he would prefer the gentle touch. It's easy to let your actions be driven by anger and hatred, but once you give in, your life will become an empty, endless cycle hate. She doesn't want Arthur to waste his life like that, so she asks him once more, "What will you do with the power?" Arthur thinks about it again, but this time he focuses on the bright smiles of the people close to him. So he answers that he wants to use his power to protect the people he cares about, and Sylvia likes that answer much more. Meanwhile, outside the cave, a monster that looks very similar to Sylvia seems to be tracking her down, and it is really close to finding her. Back in Arthur's old world, he was the king, but that didn't mean he held all the power. The people who were really in charge were the senators, so Arthur was basically just an agent of war to be called upon whenever the senators needed him to commit unspeakable acts of violence. But he never liked living that way. Back to the present, Sylvia is teaching Arthur how to use her technique, and after showing him how it's done, she asks him to try it for himself. Arthur begins condensing the mana in the surrounding air, and once he gets the hang of it, is able to use that mana to power himself up. He can already feel the difference in his strength, so he runs over to Sylvia to thank her for teaching him. However, Sylvia suddenly senses someone approaching, so she knocks Arthur into a pile of rocks and tells him to stay quiet. Arthur has no idea what's going on, so he takes a look out of the pile of rocks and sees another monster that looks just like Sylvia. Sylvia seems to know who he is, and she is surprised that he managed to find her here, but the second monster doesn't want to waste time, so he demands that Sylvia come with him. However, Sylvia says nah, so he immediately starts blasting. Arthur wants to go help Sylvia, but he hears her voice in his head, telling him not to worry about her. The other monster tries to convince Sylvia to just cooperate with him because otherwise he will have to kill her. But Sylvia would rather die than listen to him, so she starts charging up her mana and reveals her true form. It turns out that Sylvia is a dragon, and in this form she's able to use much more power than before. She fires a huge blast at the other monster, so he blocks it, but he tells her she's being foolish because with the current state of her body, she won't be able to survive using that much power. Sylvia is well aware that she will probably die from this, but she doesn't mind because she has lived a long and happy life. She manages to push the other monster into a wall, but he isn't out of the fight yet, so he hits back up and starts raining several blasts on Sylvia. She takes a lot of damage from those blasts, but right now she is more worried about Arthur than herself because this fight is getting dangerously close to the place she hit him. The other monster launches one more blast at her and she can't dodge it since it would hit Arthur, so she uses the full extent of her power to intercept the blast and stop time temporarily. While time is stopped, she tells Arthur to come out of his hiding place. Arthur does, as she says, since it seems safe and he would like to ask questions about everything that's going on, especially the fact that she's a dragon, but there's no time for that. Her time-stop power won't last much longer, so she needs to get Arthur out of here as soon as possible. She opens the dimensional rift she had been preparing, but due to her injuries and the fact that she didn't have time to properly finish the spell, the portal is connected to the middle of nowhere instead of Arthur's home. She was trying to avoid sending him into the forest since it would be dangerous, but she has no choice now. In any case, she is confident that Arthur can survive on his own and make his way back home with the technique she taught him, so she's not worried about his safety anymore. She once again asks him what he intends to use his power for, and without hesitation, Arthur answers, saying he will only use it to protect his family. So Sylvia is satisfied that he won't use his power for selfish reasons. Before he leaves, there are a few things she wants to give him, so she forms an egg and a feather in front of Arthur. She asks him to wrap the egg in the feather and cherish it well, and as a final parting gift, she imprints her will onto Arthur's body in the form of a mark on his arms. Arthur is confused by the fact that he suddenly got 2 full sleeve tattoos, but Sylvia doesn't have the strength to explain it. She tells him he will figure out how to use it one day, but sadly she won't be there to teach him anymore. She also apologizes to Arthur because the truth is that she could have teleported him back to his family when he first got here, but she was just having so much fun with him around that she didn't want it to end. And now she ended up putting him in danger because of her selfish decision. Arthur feels terrible because he knows he doesn't have the power to save Sylvia from dying here, even though she taught him so much. He doesn't care if she's a dragon or a monster. To him, she's a precious member of his family. He tells her he thinks of her as a mother, but Sylvia reminds him that he already has a mom, so Arthur says she can be his grandma then. Sylvia wasn't expecting him to say that, but she really likes the sound of being called grandma, so she asks Arthur to say it one more time, and he happily does so. Sylvia is really sad that she won't get to see Arthur again, but they are running out of time, so she nudges him forward so he can go through the portal. Arthur understands, so he takes the gifts she gave him and walks through, but at the last second he changes his mind and starts baiting Sylvie to come with him. But she can't do that, so she closes the portal and sends Arthur away. Time then resumes and Sylvia is hit with the blast from the other monster and the damage looks fatal. She collapses to the ground, but the monster isn't convinced that she is dead because it knows she is too powerful to be taken out by a blast like that. However, he lets his guard down while he is approaching her motionless body, and as soon as he is within range, Sylvia uses all of her remaining energy to fire a blast that incinerates him along with everything in a 1-mile radius. As Arthur is being teleported, he hears one final message from Sylvia. She asks him if he remembers what she said earlier about the right way to use your power, and Arthur remembers, but he is still really sad about what happened. Sylvia tells him that the world is a sad place, so things like this will happen from time to time, but that's why Arthur needs to change it for the better. Arthur protests and tells her that there's no way he could do something like that, but she doesn't expect him to change the world immediately. He can do it one step at a time after all. This isn't his first time taking control of the world. Sylvia is aware of Arthur's past life as a king, and while she doesn't agree with how he ruled back then, she is sure that as long as Arthur doesn't let himself be consumed by hatred, he will become a great king who makes the world a better place. A little while later, Arthur wakes up on the floor and he swears that he will fulfill Sylvia's request. But before that, he needs to find his way out of this forest. That brings the episode to an end. Thanks for watching. Want next part? Subscribe the channel and turn on notification bell.